The night split open like glass, and Evelyn Hart ran toward the pier as the tide hissed. The sky pulsed with a red fracture, and waves lifted as if listening. Cassian Vale caught her wrist and said, "Do not step closer." She wrenched free and stared at the figure on the jetty. Lord Malrick Crowne waited with a smile that made promises to ruin. Evelyn whispered, "You took him from me." The wind seemed to hold its breath. Malrick said, "Your heart asked for power, and power answered." The fracture rained embers across the water. Cassian stepped in front of her and said, "Behind me, Evelyn." She felt the beat in her chest become a drum. The pierboards throbbed like veins. Somewhere past the surf, a bell tolled. Evelyn said, "If you touch him, I will unmake your name." The words tasted like iron. The red light bowed toward her, as if it obeyed. Malrick laughed, and the sea rose to listen. After the surge, silence fell like a verdict, and the pier creaked as if deciding whose weight to keep. Evelyn watched the fracture fade, then felt guilt crawl under her skin. Cassian said, "He wanted you to chase him." She tasted salt and smoke and said, "He took Damien because of me." Pendant cooled against her collarbone, a sullen ember. Cassian scanned the black horizon and said, "Malrick feeds on haste." The narrator noted how Evelyn's fear of love sharpened into fury. She remembered a promise made under kinder stars. Cassian said, "We leave before his second wave." She nodded, though her heart tugged toward the water. The bell tolled again, closer now, like the world counting down. They reached the cliff road where the town slept under roofs like folded wings. The narrator marked how grief made every footstep heavy. Evelyn said, "He thinks I will break." Cassian answered, "He thinks wrong." The wind carried iodine and old stories. A stray gull cried, then quieted as if warned. Evelyn pressed the pendant and said, "Mira spoke of a wish that wounds." Cassian said, "She also spoke of choices." Headlights swept over them and slid away. Evelyn tasted the edge of power in her mouth like thunder waiting. She said, "If love is a trap, it is of my making." Cassian's silence agreed and refused in the same breath. Mira Ashford met them at the chapel steps, eyes carrying a weather of their own. The narrator noted the ache between teacher and ward. Mira said, "You touched the seam." Evelyn kept her chin high and said, "It touched me first." Candles guttered behind stained glass, painting bruised colors on stone. Cassian said, "Malrick paraded the captive." Mira's jaw tightened, then eased. She said, "The last wish is a blade with two handles." Evelyn felt the room tilt at the word blade. Cassian said, "We need ground and time." Mira nodded and said, "Then you will have both, if you can pay the price no coin knows." Inside, the chapel smelled of wax and storm, and the narrator lingered on the hush that follows bad news. Mira drew a circle of salt and said, "Stand where your heart leads." Evelyn stepped in and felt the floor answer. Cassian said, "I am here." She almost smiled at his stubborn calm. Mira whispered, "Name what you fear, and it loses teeth." Evelyn said, "I fear loving and being unmade." The candle flames leaned toward her like listeners. Cassian said, "Then let it be making, not unmaking." The pendant throbbed once, and the circle brightened. Somewhere distant, Malrick laughed, but not as loudly as before. Morning found the chapel quiet, and the narrator traced the thin smoke that threaded heavenward. Mira set chalk lines on the flagstones and said, "Your pulse is a key." Evelyn said, "Keys open cages too." Cassian watched the door and said, "Today we risk only enough to learn." A book lay open to a page on heart-bound sigils. Mira said, "Name a truth without fear." Evelyn said, "Love is not a witness, it is a weapon." The chalk brightened, and the pendant warmed like a coal. Cassian said, "Hold to me if the world tilts." The bell outside chimed once, then stilled, as if listening. The narrator noted how resolve settled on Evelyn's shoulders like armor. Mira said, "Again, but softer." Evelyn breathed and shaped the heat into a quiet thread. The chalk dimmed to a steady glow, and the room stayed whole. Cassian said, "That is enough for today." They moved to the cloister where ivy stitched shadows to the stone. The narrator described how wind braided salt with rosemary from a hidden garden. Mira said, "Lore says the last wish remakes one vow." Evelyn said, "Then one vow must be worth a world." Cassian circled the walk and said, "Spies favor arches and echo. A footfall not their own passed and faded." Mira said, "Practice on something harmless." Evelyn pressed the pendant and whispered a promise to mend a cracked tile. The seam closed like a healed lip. Cassian said, "Good, but never free." Mira nodded and said, "A cost will find you later." The gulls cried once, clean as flint. The narrator marked the fear that did not leave, only learned to stand still. Training shifted to the bellyard where nets hung like tired constellations. Jonah Pike arrived with a grin that failed to hide worry. Jonah said, "Brought coffee and a rumor." Cassian said, "Say the rumor first." Jonah said, "Two of Malrick's men asked the dockmaster about a girl with storm in her eyes." Evelyn said, "Then we changed the weather." The narrator felt the world lean toward choice. Mira said, "Shield, not spear." Evelyn drew a circle in dust and breathed. The air thickened and the gulls' cries muffled. Jonah said, "Feels like a blanket for sound." Cassian said, "Hold it while you move." She walked the ring, and the hush moved with her. The hush then shivered, and the nets shook like waking beasts. The hush snapped as a crate toppled, and a sailor swore at nothing. The narrator caught the ripple as it broke like thin glass. A woman leaned in the alley's mouth with eyes that did not settle. She said, "Nice trick if you want company." Cassian said, "Name and business." She smiled like a coin flipping and said, "Celine Gray, and I sell exits." Evelyn said, "At what price?" Celine said, "Secrets are currency and you drip." Mira said, "Shapeshifters rarely trade fair." Celine's face changed only in mood, not bone. She said, "Dockmaster will point soldiers here within the hour." Jonah said, "I heard 2 hours." Celine said, "You heard what they wanted you to hear." The wind turned and carried marching leather. They gathered in the chapel's side room, where maps lay under stones. "Alni Biwu." The narrator traced the routes like veins toward a fragile heart. Celine said, "I open paths no door admits, but you will owe me a truth." Cassian said, "We owe nothing that breaks her." Mira said, "We owe survival first." Jonah said, "Soldiers took the east lane." Evelyn said, "Then west to the cliff stairs." Celine said, "West is watched by mirrors." Evelyn said, "I am done being hunted." The pendant warmed until the map edges curled. Cassian said, "Tell me the plan and breathe while you do." Mira said, "We move at first fog." Evelyn said, "We stay and learn till then." The room agreed like a single held note. Night fog crawled across the cliff path as the group pressed on beneath a broken moon. The narrator traced the tremor in Evelyn's fingers as she gripped her pendant. Cassian said, "We're being watched." Jonah whispered, "Then let's watch back." Mira muttered a quiet word, her breath clouding like smoke. A shadow flickered among the stones, too quick for gulls. Evelyn said, "Damien was here once." Celine said, "Or someone who wears his face." Cassian stepped closer to the edge, scanning the rocks below. Dog muffled distant boots. Evelyn's heartbeat drummed against her ribs, a warning she could not name. "Celine," said, "the path narrows ahead. Good place for an ambush." Mira said, "Then we make it a test instead." The narrator lingered on a lone lantern swinging from a dead tree, its flame barely alive. Jonah stepped first and said, "Old paths remember old debts." Evelyn whispered, "This place feels like a memory that isn't mine." Cassian said, "Stay sharp. Malrick seeds traps in silence." Celine traced a sigil on the air, her fingers shimmering faintly. Mira said, This crossroads holds echoes, speak no promises here. A distant howl tore through the fog, not wolf, not human. Evelyn gripped her pendant and said, "Damien, if you are here, don't hide." The wind stilled unnaturally, and the lantern flame flared crimson before returning to gold. Jonas said, "That was wrong." Cassian said, "We keep moving before wrong grows teeth." They descended into an abandoned watchtower carved into the cliffs. The narrator described the salt-stained walls whispering with history. Evelyn said, "This place remembers battles." Cassian said, "And betrayals." Jonah brushed moss from a cracked mural of a heart, split by lightning. Mira said the prophecy was painted here first. Celine added, "Or rewritten to suit a victor." A stone shifted above, scattering dust like falling stars. Cassian raised his blade, muscles tense. Evelyn's pendant pulsed with a heartbeat not her own. Damien's voice drifted from the shadows. "You shouldn't have come." Jonah muttered, "I hate when ghosts talk like they own the place." Mira said, "Not a ghost, something worse." Damien Thorne stepped from the darkness, his eyes catching stray firelight like broken glass. Evelyn said, "You were supposed to be dead." Damien said, "Death is overrated." The narrator marked the tremor in her breath. Cassian said, "You chose Malrick." Damien replied, "I chose survival." Jonah took a step back, nearly tripping on loose stone. Mira said, "This is the wound prophecy warned of." Celine's eyes narrowed as if reading Damien's soul. Damien said, "Malrick's bargain is not what you think." Evelyn's pendant flared, throwing shadows that danced like ghosts across the tower. Cassian whispered, "Don't believe him." Evelyn whispered, "I already do and don't." The air thickened with unspoken choices as Damien stepped closer, boots scraping on grit. He said, "Malrick wants her heart's power, but he fears it too." Evelyn said, "Then he should keep fearing." Cassian said, "You've done enough damage." Damien said, "I can help you, but my help costs more than trust." Jonah whispered, "This feels like the part where everything breaks." Mira said, "Or the part where it bends." Celine's gaze flicked between Damien and Evelyn, weighing unseen scales. The narrator felt the world hold its breath. Evelyn's pendant glowed brighter, a heartbeat pounding against destiny's door. She said, "Speak your terms, Damien, and pray they are kind." Storm clouds rolled over Malrick's citadel as the group crept through an abandoned aqueduct. The narrator traced the damp echo of their steps beneath ancient arches. Evelyn whispered, "This feels like walking through a grave." Cassian said, "Graves don't usually fight back." Jonah muttered, "That's reassuring." Mira pressed her palm to a faded sigil on the wall. She said, "Old words linger here." Celine moved ahead silently, her eyes sharp for traps. Damien walked behind, shadowed and unreadable. A distant rumble suggested movement in the citadel above. Evelyn said, "The relic waits." Cassian whispered, "So does Malrick." The pendant throbbed in warning, and the wind seemed to hold its breath. They emerged into a forgotten courtyard overgrown with thorned vines. The narrator described the moonlight pooling like spilled mercury. Celine said, "Too quiet." Jonah said, "I hate when you say that." Mira knelt to examine an old carving. She said, "This mark is a warning. Heart magic twists here." Damien stood at the edge, staring toward the citadel's glowing spire. Evelyn whispered, "He's near." Cassian stepped closer to her and said, "Stay behind me." The vines stirred unnaturally, whispering against stone. The air held a faint hum, like strings tuned too tight. Celine said, "We move fast or not at all." Evelyn nodded, though her heart pounded louder than the hum. Inside the citadel's outer hall, broken stained glass painted fractured colors across the floor. The narrator traced the patterns like shards of memory. Evelyn said, "This place was once holy." Damien replied, "Holiness is just power with better press." Cassian shot him a glare but said nothing. Jonah whispered, "Windows don't break themselves." Mira raised a chalk sigil on the wall, muttering protection. Celine stepped through the rainbow light and said, "Keep your eyes on the shadows." The pendant pulsed, sensing the relic near. A low groan of stone echoed through the chamber, deep and ominous. Evelyn's breath caught as she felt the citadel itself shifting around them. They found the relic room guarded by a warded door, etched with heart sigils. Mira said, "This door drinks lies." Celine said, "Then tell her the truth it doesn't want." Evelyn placed her palm on the sigil and whispered, "I loved and lost, but I am not broken." The door flared and opened with a sigh. Damien muttered, "Pain is the purest key." Cassian said, "Pain isn't the only key." Jonah whispered, "Move before it changes its mind." The relic floated above a stone pedestal, glowing like a captured sunrise. The narrator noted how its light stretched and wrapped around Evelyn, as if choosing her already. The relic bound itself to Evelyn, light spiraling around her wrist like a vow. She gasped as warmth and weight mingled. Cassian said, "It chose you." Malrick's laughter rolled through the walls, distant yet near. Celine hissed, "He knows." Jonah said, "We need to move." Mira's eyes were wide, seeing prophecy unfold. Damien said, "This brands Cassian as her fated counterpart. Malrick will use that." Evelyn steadied her breath and said, "Then let him come." The narrator felt the chamber tighten with destiny's grip. Cassian stepped closer, his presence a shield. The relic's glow dimmed but did not fade, and the citadel trembled around them. The storm outside the citadel swelled as the group huddled beneath fractured arches. The narrator traced the tremble in Evelyn's fingers as she tightened her grip on the relic. Cassian said, "We can't outrun him forever." Mira replied, "Nor can we outwait prophecy." Jonah's voice wavered. What if prophecy isn't truth but trap? Celine's eyes flickered with unease. Damien stepped closer, shadows hugging his frame. He said, "Malrick was forged from a wish that shattered." Evelyn's pendant pulsed, casting brief golden light. She said, "Then my heart will forge something stronger." Distant thunder echoed like laughter. Cassian said, "We prepare here, or we fall on the run." The relic's hum deepened, as if agreeing. They gathered around a sputtering torch as thunder rolled like distant drums. Jonah said, "Malrick's men circle the cliffs." Celine replied, "Let them chase ghosts, we'll be elsewhere." Damien's voice was low. He knows Cassian's bond to her. Cassian said, "Then we use that bond against him." Evelyn felt the relic's weight on her wrist, heavy as destiny. Mira traced protective sigils on the floor, her fingers steady despite the cold. The narrator described the storm, whispering secrets through shattered windows. Evelyn said, "I won't let him decide our fate." Cassian's eyes softened briefly before hardening again. Celine smirked thinly and said, "Then let's turn prophecy into bait." The narrator followed Celine as she led them through a hidden stair spiraling into darkness. Water dripped steadily from unseen cracks. Evelyn whispered, "How many ways does the citadel hide paths?" Celine said, "Enough to keep liars alive." Jonah muttered, "Great, comforting." Cassian brushed a hand along the wall and said, "He'll anticipate this route." Damien's shadow stretched ahead, an omen in motion. Mira said, "Prophecy doesn't account for choice, only potential." The stairway opened to a cavern glowing with strange light. Evelyn felt the relic throb as if eager. Cassian said, "This is where we decide if we bend or break." The hum of magic filled the cavern like breath. They stepped into the cavern where crystals rose like frozen lightning. The relic's light blended with the glow, casting long dancing shadows. Damien said, "Malrick will come through Cassian's bond." Evelyn said, "Then we use the bond as a trap." Mira's voice was steady, but a trap can close on its maker. Jonah swallowed hard and said, "Or it's bait." Celine circled the crystals, eyes calculating angles of escape. Cassian stepped beside Evelyn, resolve etched in every line. The narrator traced the tension crackling in the air like static. Evelyn pressed her palm to the relic and said, "Let him come. We're ready to choose." The cavern trembled as Malrick's laughter echoed like cracking stone. Damien said, "He's closer than you think." Evelyn's heart pounded like a drumbeat against destiny. Cassian stepped forward and said, "We hold the line here." Mira said, "Remember, the relic listens to truth." Jonah whispered, "Then let's shout the right one." Celine smirked faintly, but tightened her grip on her blade. Evelyn lifted the relic high, its glow swelling. She said, "Malrick's chain breaks tonight." The narrator felt the cavern's air thicken with power. A surge of magic rippled outward, shaking crystals loose. The hum became a roar, and the choice before them sharpened like a blade. The cavern's collapse drove them into a narrow gorge under a bruised sky. The narrator followed Evelyn as she steadied herself against slick rock. Cassian said, "He'll strike when we're split." Celine replied, "Then we don't split." Jonah coughed dust and said, "Too late for that." Mira raised a glowing ward, its light a fragile circle against the encroaching dark. Damien's voice was grim. "Malrick's army closes from both ends." Evelyn gripped the relic tighter and said, "Then we carve our own path." Thunder rolled overhead, like distant drums of war. The wind carried the smell of salt and stone, heavy with fate's weight. Cassian's jaw clenched as he scanned the horizon. The narrator traced their breath misting as cold rain began to fall. Jonah said, "We're boxed in." Selen's voice was a low hiss, "Not if we move first." Mira whispered, "The cliff pass ahead holds an ancient crossing." Cassian said, "Malrick knows every crossing." Damien stepped forward, shadows clinging to him. He said, "He fears one thing, her choice." Evelyn felt her heartbeat quicken. She said, "Then I'll make it count." Lightning flashed, revealing distant soldiers scaling the ridges. The relic pulsed warmly against her skin. The wind carried whispers of vows broken and remade. Jonah muttered, "Guess we're the storm now." They reached the ancient crossing, a broken bridge of stone slabs suspended by forgotten magic. The narrator described the abyss yawning below like a hungry mouth. Evelyn said, "This is madness." Cassian said, "It's survival." Celine tested the first slab with her boot. Jonah muttered, "I'm not great with heights." Mira's voice steadied them. "The stones respond to courage, not weight." Damien said, "Then courage will kill us or save us." Evelyn stepped onto the bridge, the relic's glow brightening with each footfall. The wind howled like a chorus of ghosts. Cassian followed, blade in hand. The crossing groaned but held. Halfway across, lightning struck a distant ridge, shaking the crossing. The narrator noted Evelyn's knuckles, whitening on the relic. Damien said, "Malrick is pushing the storm." Cassian growled, then pushed back. Celine leapt to the next slab, her movement precise and fearless. Jonah slipped, catching himself on Mira's arm. Mira steadied him and said, "The bridge reads out, steady your heart." Evelyn whispered a vow. "I choose love, not fear." The relic flared, sending ripples of light along the slabs. Cassian's gaze softened briefly, before fixing on the far end, where Malrick's soldiers gathered. The wind screamed like an omen. They reached the far side as Malrick's forces closed in. The narrator described thunder rolling like war drums. Evelyn turned, raising the relic high. Malrick's voice carried on the wind, "Your heart will undo you." Cassian stepped beside her, blade gleaming. Damien said, "If we fight together." Celine smirked faintly, adjusting her grip on the dagger. Jonah whispered, "I'm in even if I'm shaking." Mira said, "Stand firm, the world watches." The relic's glow expanded, forming a halo of light. Evelyn said, "Tonight, the heart chooses." The wind howled, and the storm's fury wrapped around them like a living thing. The storm broke into a deafening calm, leaving shattered cliffs and a trembling sky. The narrator traced the glow of the relic as it hovered over Evelyn's palm. Cassian said, "We're not finished yet." Celine scanned the horizon and said, "Malrick won't run, he'll make us chase." Jonah whispered, "Then we finish what he started." Mira's voice carried quiet authority. "Steady your hearts. The last wish listens." Damien stepped forward, shadows reluctant to release him. Evelyn said, "We choose love over fear." The wind shifted, carrying Malrick's distant laughter like brittle glass breaking. Cassian tightened his grip on his blade. The world waited for the final move. They advanced toward the citadel's heart, where Malrick awaited among crumbling arches. The narrator described the air shimmering with fractured magic. Malrick's voice cut through the silence. "The heart's last wish belongs to me." Evelyn said, "It never did." Cassian stepped closer, protective. Damien said, "This ends tonight." Celine circled, seeking an opening. Jonah muttered, "I can't believe we made it this far." Mira whispered, "Faith travels on broken roads." Malrick raised his hands, power coiling like a storm reborn. The ground shuddered, as if bracing for destiny's collision. Evelyn's pendant flared, defying the darkness. The first clash of magic split the hall with light and sound. The narrator followed Evelyn as she shielded Cassian with a burst of heart energy. Malrick snarled, "You cannot defy prophecy." Damien leapt forward, intercepting a spell meant for her. Celine slipped through shadows, striking where Malrick's focus wavered. Jonah dragged a fallen beam clear to free Mira's path. Mira shouted, "Hold fast, the relic's truth is choice." Evelyn said, "Then I choose." The relic flared, cracking the floor. Cassian shouted, "Now!" They surged together, hearts aligned against destiny's weight. The relic's light wrapped Cassian and Evelyn in a halo, binding them. Malrick roared, his magic unraveling as Damien's blade found its mark. Celine's dagger struck a weak point in the citadel's structure, collapsing part of the hall. Jonah pulled Mira to safety as rubble fell. Damien shouted, "End it now!" Evelyn pressed her forehead to Cassian's, whispering, "I trust my heart." Cassian said, "Then so do I." The relic blazed, rewriting the bonds Malrick had twisted. Malrick screamed as the magic consumed him, his voice fading like smoke in wind. The hall fell silent, save for the soft hum of remade fate. Dawn broke over the quiet cliffs, painting the sea in soft fire. The narrator traced Evelyn's fingers, brushing Cassian's as they watched the horizon. Jonah sat against a boulder, exhausted but smiling faintly. Mira closed her eyes, whispering a prayer of thanks. Celine lingered at the edge, her expression unreadable, then vanished into mist. Damien stood apart, head bowed, his future uncertain. Evelyn said, "The heart's last wish wasn't an ending." Cassian replied, "It was a beginning." The wind carried the scent of salt and promise. The world felt fragile, yet whole.